Hi, everyone. Welcome to the first episode of the Liv Life podcast. I decided to start doing this podcast kind of as like a love letter to the things that I've learned about being a woman on this earth, and a desire to hear stories about a diverse group of women, with just a focus on providing a platform to women and women identifying people to tell their stories the way they want. So I am incredibly honored to have my first guest be my mom, who taught me so much about how to navigate the world being who I am, and just, being happy and joyful along the way. So this is my mom, Grace Russak.
Thank you.
Hi,
I'm
Mama.
incredibly honored to be here. Thank you, sweetie.
So I guess I just want to start off, if you could tell us, I know you just did this in the Shout Out Buff Nerd podcast right before this, but if you could tell our listeners just a little bit about what you do, your background. I know it's a very hard thing to answer quickly, but actually, no rush.
Okay, sure. Well, I'll start with background. I grew up overseas. My father was in international business, so as had been his father. So I was sort of third generation peripatetic expat, and was born in Spain, and primary years were in Latin America, and then secondary years in England, and college years in France, where the family lived. I was back in the States for college, and then I wanted to work in something international, and I liked art, so I worked in the art auction business, and then and I can talk about specifics in these areas later, but and then moved out to LA and reconnected with your papa. We fell madly in love and got married, and we ended up settling here, which was home for him and became home for me, with our three wonderful daughters.
So wonderful daughters.
Wonderful daughters, yes. And the joys of our life. And now I'm in wealth management, working here in LA, and work with a lot of women and love what I do.
That's awesome. One thing that I've always been curious about, and something that I feel particularly interested in now, is when you were my age, kind of starting out, you had this history of having traveled all around the world, and I'm sure that you were, both like confused, terrified, and had the world in front of you. So where were you when you were a young woman, and what made you decide to go into business? Did you have women role models? Did you feel like you had to kind of make your own identity as a young professional woman? Because obviously it was a different time, even though it was very recently.
Very.
So what was that like? Did you feel like there were either internal or external barriers, and how did you navigate them?
I think I was blessedly naive. My parents were in a very traditional marriage, and with all the moving we did, I remember coming back from college at one point and sort of looking at my mother askance, like, what have you done with your life? And then I had occasion to remark that in all the countries we lived in, she who'd never lived outside of 20 miles outside of New York City, moved to Spain 7 months pregnant with her first child,
right,
and lived in, I lived in 6 countries. They continued to travel after I was on my own. And in each place, created a beautiful home and lovely environment for us, and really kept everything smooth sailing.
Right.
And it took me a while to recognize the import of that. And it was very hard for her, I think, to deal with her own identity, particularly as we were grown and gone. And it was of that generation where things were changing so much for women. She was of that sort of 50s generation of the white gloves and pearls. And, you stop working when you get pregnant.
Right.
And she did go back to school in some ways after, in some areas after we had left, to go to college and whatnot. And so, but despite being raised in that sort of very sort of traditional environment, it was she who was insistent that my sister and I learned to stand on our own feet. We have a brother, and it was different rules,
right,
but as women learned to stand on our feet, and that we go to a top school for university. but I mean, she was equally insistent that we have sort of the traditional manners training and all that stuff. But it was she who really insisted that we be able to stand on our own feet professionally and financially and whatnot. And then my father was, who's super traditional,
Yeah.
was also the one who, as a little kid, I remember saying, I don't know, I was reading some kid's book or maybe a Cherry Ames mystery or something. And I think I want to be a nurse. And he said, well, why don't you think about being a doctor? And he actually was the graduation speaker at my high school.
Really?
Yeah, talking about the role of women and how it's changing on feminism.
What?
Yeah, yeah.
I had no idea.
Yeah, I still have a speech somewhere. I was valedictorian and he was the speaker. I mean, the whole class must have hated us, but it was a really small school.
Wow.
But he talked about this changing role of women and feminism and how, we now had everything ahead of us. And then I went to Smith. And,
yeah, right.
God
Alma
knows
mater
of Betty Friedan and Gloria Steinem and all sorts of people.
Right.
And I joke that in some ways I didn't know what a handicap it was to be a woman until I got there. As far as I was concerned, I could do anything I wanted. And but it was an amazing education and perspective. And then you get into the working world, and I wanted to be in something international. I wanted to be in business, largely because I didn't want to be in an art gallery. I liked art.
Right.
I was going to go to law school, so I was just sort of taking a break. And I didn't want to be in an art gallery or a museum. I just thought I'd be bored to tears. It just didn't look that busy. So I liked the business aspect of it, and then you did run into issues being a woman. And what I can't really know is how much of it has to do with being in your mid-20s. And I today talk to a lot of the 20-year-olds with whom I work and make it clear I understand that when you're in your mid-20s, you think there's been a horrible mistake, that you really should be the next chairman of whatever firm you are in. And you don't fully, and that nobody understands that.
I mean,
you're
true.
Undervalued. And, that it's my job on the other side of that to let them know that in part is true, and there are just a few other steps along the way. So I don't know how much of it, is age appropriate and how much of it is gender for me.
Yeah.
And I think it's a combination, and how much of it was mindset too. But I ended up in a business that once I got out of the assistant role, then I could build as much as I want.
Right.
A lot of it had to do with earning my stripes by bringing in new business. And once I got moved into business development, and it was actually a woman at the firm, a senior woman, who identified that. So let's just move her. And I was really grateful for that. Then I could sort of, because at the time I started in business development with Sotheby's, it was to sort of restructure and execute on their strategy for their Latin American offices.
Right.
I'd lived there. I had a lot of help in terms of constructing the ideas, and then it was on me to create and do. So it was very entrepreneurial. Nobody knew that world. We didn't have any of the lists. We only had 10 names, but they were the only 10 names that mattered in Latin America. And I figured out how to get in the door to see them. There's no name recognition, but I figured that out.
Right.
And then just found great people to work with us and then join as our office heads, and they built it. So it's one of those, the success happened by figuring it out, and that was a gender neutral opportunity, which is unusual.
Right.
But I was grateful for it, and the metrics were different.
Right.
And it was outside of the normal corporate ladder. It was, there's this whole continent, go figure it out, and business comes in and you're golden. So
right.
Which is not to say there weren't obstacles and things. I think I had more issues, ironically, from a gender basis once I got into more senior management.
Right.
In sort of a small corporate world.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's like, well, this can't, I am way too old for this to be happening, as we used to talk.
Yeah.
So
there are a few things that I'm really interested in. One is, you talk about how you grew up in a traditional like house structure, but it seems like the relevant thing that you experienced was even within that, you still had the maybe not role model in the traditional sense of, you could see a woman who did the thing you wanted to do and you're like, that means I can do that because I could see myself as that. But you had people from an earlier age tell you, you can do this, or you should do this. You have the capacity to do this. Am I hearing that right?
Yeah, I think I was very pre-Copernican. The world revolved around me. I didn't really have a problem with, I had forgotten, but when I was in kindergarten, there was a girls group and a boys group, and I was the head of the girls group.
Mhm.
And I would spend time talking to the boys group about how we were going to work together. I was like, that's stupid. I have no idea.
Right.
So to me, it was sort of course,
Right.
And I spent my probably from about 7th grade on in all women.
Mhm.
I appreciated all women's education at the college level because it was Smith and
Yeah.
and the focus I learned there. I don't know that after high school I would have otherwise done that.
Right.
But I think was helpful for me.
Mhm.
Although I don't know, I did have the support at home that I could do these things, but I always sort of didn't know I couldn't.
Right.
And for some strange reason of circumstance, didn't have a lot of barriers in my way.
Yeah.
And it could be that it was sort of self-fulfilling prophecy. I chose things I knew I could do. I don't really know, but it was not, literally, it wasn't until I got to Smith that I joke about
Right.
about it, but it's like, wow, yeah, I didn't even realize that.
Right. So you talked about later in your career when you did start noticing some challenges. Can you, as well as you can, speak to that and talk about ways that you successfully or maybe unsuccessfully navigated certain situations? I'm actually, if you're comfortable, really interested in maybe certain situations that you look back on and you wish you had handled differently and why. If you can, whether it has to do with gender or maybe not, if you can't think of that.
This is so personal, and I think you're damned if you do and damned if you don't when you talk about these things. So, because other people's situations are much more either judgmental or more difficult. Right. So I don't intend that anything I say be dismissive of their experience.
Of course.
This is just simply mine, and I'm forgetting a lot of things. But when I was in the auction business, for instance, early days, we had a big single owner sale, and the consignor was a wealthy European, and he had a CFO, chief operating officer type, who was our contact. And the company was just switching to mainframes, and we had a whole accounting department. But for these single owner sales, because the terms of sale were so exclusive, I was faster at reconciling the sales by hand and a calculator. So I stayed up the whole night, did it, got into a DHL,
What's that?
Courier.
Oh.
This was like, in the 70s, early 80s, and very early 80s, and sending it over to Switzerland. And then I called him and I said, your package with the sale reconciliation and totals will be, totals to you, net to you, will be on your doorstep at 2. He said, oh, great. I'll look at it when I get back. And I said, yeah, it's all correct. I did it myself. And he said, oh, damn it, I really wanted to play golf today. It's like, yeah, what? He goes, well, no offense, but women aren't very good with figures.
Nice.
And so now I'm going to have to review the whole thing. And I said, well, no offense, but isn't that your job? He said, yeah, but I thought I could just sort of give it a cursory look, so now I'm going to have to do it. Okay, well, anyway, fine. Well, that just shoots my whole day. Well, anyway, I hear you guys had a good sale in London last night, and you sold a Pizarro for $300,000. And I said, it was for $600,000, but I guess men aren't good at figures.
Oh, shit!
And he burst out laughing, and he said, I'm going off to golf. Thank you for your work. I was an idiot, right? So I learned, sometimes humor works.
Yeah.
And he just fed me that line, and instead of reacting emotionally, I was able to bat it right back.
Right.
Other times I think
I'm sorry, that's such a good story.
It was great. He just fed it right to me, like boom. And I wish I had a lot more of those, and I don't. there are times when I think we were talking about this weekend at the leadership, where women shouldn't be so emotional at work.
That's what people say.
And, women who are, yes, and women who are.
Just so we're clear, everyone.
Yeah, sorry, yes. Women in business they say women in business shouldn't be so emotional. They shouldn't, basically all the shoulds and shouldn't mean you should be more like a man.
Right. That's the standard.
And that's the standard. And as opposed to, at what point do you get some parity where there's value in the woman's approach?
Right.
And the truth is, often if there is a problem in a work environment, I do find having the facts and not the emotion, conveying the problem that way,
right,
allows for a quicker resolution when I'm talking to men about it. Mm-hmm. And so I have to be very careful to be sure I have the facts.
Right.
And because otherwise I'm a hysterical woman.
Right.
And so why is that the measure?
Yep.
And why does that make my otherwise natural tendency wrong?
Right.
But the reality is, the more I can kind of play that game,
right,
and also subtract the emotion, the more effective I can get.
Right.
Humor is also very good. I mean, it's so easy for a woman to be adamant or enthusiastic or passionate or emphatic, and you're dubbed hysterical woman.
Yeah.
And therefore wrong.
Yes.
And diminished.
Right.
And so you have to masquerade, and it doesn't make it right, but it's something that you have to learn to do.
Yeah.
And the other thing I've learned over time is, if you're raised to be sort of you have these sort of manners, and you ask for, you follow these guidelines, and here are the rules, and you want to be correct, and blah, blah, blah. It kind of becomes you're asking for permission, and men tend to ask for forgiveness.
Yes, definitely.
Like there's a meeting, there's a closed door. As a woman, you might not barge in, even though you can be in that meeting.
Right.
Man will just barge in.
Right.
And a woman, you'd be wait to be asked.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, it's been an hour. Screw this. I'm
right.
going to go in. Where do you learn that? And and I think men also, as mentors, they dismiss women's natural tendencies as something that's wrong, and so they're happy to mentor you, but get rid of all that stuff that's making me crazy.
I think that's so interesting, because that's something I've been much more interested in as I've grown older, because
at your advanced age,
since I've lived so much,
yes,
and understand so much about the world, and particularly myself.
How's that PhD going?
Going really well. I look at kind of my journey through understanding myself as a girl and then a young woman, and I think about when I was younger, and I was just I learned quickly I don't want to dolls. I don't want to wear pink. I was really,
because of the stereotypical.
That's girly.
Yeah.
I wanted to be a tomboy. I got mad when I didn't get asked to play kickball. What they didn't know, it's because I wasn't good. But
sorry, I'm just remembering you as an athlete as a young child.
that's
you were a great athlete in hise school, and
conversation
beyond.
For another day.
Yes,
those awkward days.
Okay.
But I was really attached to just a lot of disdain of the feminine.
Uh-huh.
And and I think now that I look back, and I was really interested when you were talking about your mom, hearing about what purpose stereotypically feminine traits serve is so valuable. But it's kind of a double-edged sword, because in some ways there are things that are really valuable of it, but in some ways it's also what many people feel hold women back.
Mm-hmm.
So on the one hand, I'm here, having this podcast as like I said, my love letter to women and women identifying people and femininity, and also having conversations about how to navigate that successfully, and in some ways abandoning it, having that be the path to success, instead of and so that's something I struggle with. And I think it's something, at least from as I've grown up with you, so much of our conversations about the role of women have been about being a working mom, and having, to balance being a working mother. And I remember hearing stories about like you having to take us to a doctor's appointment or a soccer game or something like that, and that then becoming a barrier and a choice you had to make. So I now, I mean, if we could transition kind of into that, we've talked about this a lot, but maybe just to, what's your take on being a working mom and how, motherhood and nurturance is valued and also devalued? And what does that mean? And how does someone like me work with that?
Um, it's complicated.
Yeah.
When I was graduating from Smith, Jill Conway, who was the president, was giving our baccalaureate address, and she was, very successful professionally, married, never had children, but said something that was so important, which was the issue of marriage and children in your careers isn't a problem. It is a question with which you will be dealing your whole lives. And as we're facing our reunion coming up, I harken back to that and think about, what did that mean for us? I think when I was starting, there were big changes. I always expected to work. It just never occurred to me.
Right.
And I'm not sure I fully appreciated the stress it would take on me or that I would impose on myself.
Right.
Your father, who's fabulous, a partner, jokes about, when you guys all went off to college. It's like, hi, remember me? I'm Ken. We used to date. Remember, said, women have kids. And it's like, whoa, what happened to my wife? But, and I chose to take on a lot more of the day-to-day things. I wanted to do that. And he was very happy to let me. And I think were we to do it over, there might be a little more parity, but I mean, It was wonderful, but I did a lot of it. And he was also in a profession where, it's billable hours and whatnot.
Right.
It wasn't until I got a lot older that I realized how important it is not to go for perfect.
Right.
The living room is what it is, and then we became the house the kids all came to. So What a joy is that.
Yeah.
And then I got to redecorate it when you guys all left.
Right.
And, barred the door. but
I
didn't know that at the time. And, when the house wasn't perfect or these other things, and it never was, never will be, I would beat myself up. It was a reflection on me and this sort of, I can do it all, which is nonsense.
Right.
I know for me, it was really important to have a career and be successful and be paid and valued. But one of the things that Ken and I talked a lot about once we had children was that balancing act. And so we had some sort of rules between us, one of which was, particularly when our kids were very little, we starting with, when Emily was born, our oldest was born, you get those sort of little thoughts at the back of your head that you dismiss to voice those to each other in case we saw a pattern for somebody who couldn't speak for herself.
Meaning like
something's a little off, that little sort of thought you get at the back of your head about something.
Right.
When it came to our child, the home, childcare, any of that, not to dismiss it, but to try to recognize it and speak in case there was a pattern we observed. Because she couldn't speak for herself.
Okay.
And then as you all got older, God knows Maddie could speak for all of you.
Another conversation.
The rules person. But it was actually helpful to, the nanny was late today or whatever. The other was, as fair as we would be with people who might work with us in a corporate environment or otherwise, when it came to our child, we gave ourselves permission not to be fair. I mean, we always were.
Right.
But if something was off, again, it was our child, which sounds sort of strange, but it was just that, and that we would watch, and if ever we felt the two working parent situation was adversely affecting any one of you, we would make a change accordingly.
I see.
So that's as far as we forecast out. And God knows, you guys know, you lived it, the change between nanny, daycare, whatever, we went through all of that, and it all seemed to work out. I think it's insanely complicated and busy when the kids are little.
Yeah.
And I realized, Labor Day for me was already the start of what you guys were going to be doing the next summer. And the summer was making sure you were properly scheduled and I wasn't scheduling you so you could be better, more accomplished people. It's to make sure you were taken care of.
Fed, bathed.
Whatever.
Might be learning how to read.
Yeah. No.
Just kidding.
So I think but I remember going to work, I had a 9-minute commute.
Right.
When most of the time which was an incredible luxury. And, I remember one of my friends talking to one of my colleagues and saying, "Oh, we never even knew Grace worked." I was like, "No, quiet." She goes, "Oh, she's always at school. She's a room parent." And stuff. Going, "No, stop." I remember turning myself into a pretzel about something, taking somebody to, a doctor's appointment, I don't know, whatever, something that sort of standard operating procedure, nothing goes according to schedule.
Right.
But I had kids at a private school. I had somebody to take care of them. I had an extra car.
Yeah.
We worked. We made a good living.
We had a lot of privilege.
And one of the assistants at the office didn't have any of that.
Yeah.
And she had to call a neighbor. And I thought, wow, what am I doing complaining?
Yeah.
I mean, my salary level, I'm lucky enough, all the women here are in this boat. And how do we help one another? And then the other thing that goes on, which I think is horrific, is what I call the mommy wars, the working moms versus the non. I mean, it's just inexcusable. And I understand it. And once I sort of figured it out, I needed the non-working moms. Once I understood what their buttons were, then I was able to sort of, in large measure, overcome a lot of it. And that's got to stop. It's ridiculous.
I'm so glad you mentioned, the other women at your office, because I think that that's, an enormous part of this conversation that you and I are having right now, and that we've always had, is, the obvious fact of where we come from, what we look like, the access to education and healthcare, all these things that we've had. And so I'm wondering, like, what does that mean to you to understand where, different women come from, what their backgrounds are, and is it just the knowledge of, like, okay, I can chill out, this is not that big of a deal, or is it like, because a lot of what you do for your whole career is connecting with different people,
right?
It's understanding, people from Colombia and their art collection and why this specific piece is important because of it relates to, like, some war that their grandfather, fought in, and that's really emotional for them. And I imagine that kind of mindset is really helpful in connecting with women, and you work a lot with women. So, like, can you speak to that?
Sure. I think, the epiphany for me in terms of going to the office that one day, and I don't know why it was that one day versus any other, for me, being a working mom was an option and a choice. It was important to me, but our livelihood didn't rely on it, depend upon it, because my husband was working, Ken was working and doing very well. So the struggle I had was somewhat self-imposed, and at a certain point, it seemed ridiculous to me when I realized how many women in my life on a daily basis didn't have a choice.
Yeah.
They didn't complain about it. They didn't worry about it. They just did it.
Yeah.
And I was like, wow, what a little brat I am, and it didn't make my head case any easier, but it was, that's the reality. And I think, it's easy enough to talk about how you succeed up the corporate ladder and all that, and that's well good. What about, and everybody has stories. I mean, one of the moms we both know is 5 sons. Was talking about she's a senior hospital administrator, and there was a glitch and she's a single mom, and there was a glitch with one of the boys getting to soccer or something, and she excused herself from a board meeting, and in 5 minutes rearranged an entire paradigm for all 5 boys, comes back in, and the board chair goes, "Oh, I'm sorry, we got to go early. I got to coach soccer." It's like, I couldn't say that.
Yeah.
Right. Because whereas a guy could say that.
It's good for you. Wow. Look at you, like really changing that gender role.
Right.
Like you're really stepping into that role. Like good for you.
Right.
Instead of like, Jesus Christ, not again.
Right. Exactly. And yet, she had people with cars and, and yet you look at, all the women who are trying to start businesses and are single moms and don't make big salaries and things. It's complicated. And how do you, I remember reading an article about how childcare and offices have to change and how men have to have as much of a role. And it was a complete paradigm shift.
Yeah.
And it was the first time I saw that or was exposed to it, that actually men can carry 50% of the burden.
Yeah.
40, 30, and I was just, this woman doesn't get it. She mustn't have children. And I realized, no, she gets it. I am stuck in a different paradigm.
Yeah.
And then once I got that, I thought, oh my God, of course, wow.
Yeah.
And it's so obvious on reflection, but at the time it was stunning to me that I was the one stuck in the paradigm for something I needed.
Who knew?
I know. Sorry, I get stuck in my paradigm. Wow. But I think there's more of that.
Totally.
Newer paradigm.
Yeah.
I think your generation is more aware of it, more willing. And that being said, you look at what's going on around the city and around the country and around the world, and it's not like we're there by any means.
Right. I think it's so awesome that you bring up that article that you read, because one thing, that I'm being more aware of, one thing I talked to my boyfriend Terrence about is not just about how sexism negatively impacts women, but how much it negatively impacts men. There's this really, really, what comedian was it? Bill Burr has this bit where he talks about like going to the grocery store, or it was Halloween season, and like his girlfriend really wanted to get a pumpkin, and like he had this like absolute breakdown, and it's absolutely hilarious, really inappropriate, where he talks about like, I'm using censored language, but like, what a sissy, like you want a pumpkin, like what kind of little brat baby are you, and like how much masculinity made him like suffer in this moment just to buy a goddamn pumpkin for Halloween, and he was like, masculinity is the thing that tells you can't hug a baby and you can't cry at a sad movie, and it was hilarious. I suggest listening to it, but also I think it really speaks to the fact that like, because of these things that we believe in, that we believe to be true, that you have to play a certain role, we're denying, half of the population the ability to be in touch with their emotions, the ability to describe how they feel, the ability to want to be nurturing and have that be a social risk. And I think it's so true, the ability for like a man to be able to take paternity leave and not be seen as lesser.
Right.
Or weak, because we have this idea that vulnerability or caring for another person is a weakness, as opposed to part of creating a stronger society.
Right.
And I do think it's something that like my generation is more aware of, but it's really fascinating. The more conversations I have with men about sexism, the more they're like, well, yeah, I have been experiencing this, and I do want to be able to talk about that. You're like, these things are important to me, and it's such an unsafe conversation for them to have emotionally. And I find those parallels really fascinating.
Well, I remember hearing from a woman who's very instrumental in, I think it's called the 30% Project. I don't have the name exactly correct, but it is an effort in Europe, fairly successful effort at this point, to have corporations have 30% women board members. Mm-hmm. And she initially approached it from the women's standpoint, and then she realized, wait, we're in the super minority.
Right.
And she realized that in order for things to improve for women, men have to buy into that.
Right.
Right. So it's not about just women fighting for women. It has to be men and women.
Right.
So the next iteration of that would be if women as primary caregivers if their situation is going to improve, then it has to improve for men. It's a two-way street.
Right.
I mean, their involvement, they have to buy in.
Yeah.
They have to be part of the effort.
Right.
And it's not going to work if it's just a housewife role.
Right.
It has to include men, and the upside for men is that it can address those conflicts within them.
Right.
But it has to be sort of a sea change.
Right. Well, and there are serious mental health consequences on either end of the spectrum of gender.
What are you talking about? Sorry. Sorry.
Don't apologize.
Not too stressed. No.
No. What anxiety? Yeah, that's really great. So, another thing I'm interested in is you kind of talked about like the generational differences and of whatever you call it, feminism, women's rights, all these different things. What do you notice are the biggest differences of, how people are approaching gender parity or just maybe parity in general from when you were my age to what you notice now?
Well, I don't think we have gender parity.
Sure.
So. We're not there yet.
I completely agree, but at least the conversation surrounding it.
I think we're a lot closer.
Mm-hmm.
I think we recognize that as a goal.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't even a goal.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't even gender parity. What the hell is that?
Right.
So efforts to succeed were really individual.
Yeah.
And you look at the fact that now over 50% of the graduating classes of virtually all universities are women.
Right.
It's not only a demographic in terms of the numbers of women born and whatnot, but also a change in terms of women. So it will happen.
Right.
That we're not there given all the effort is shocking, but that now it is a goal. There are metrics.
Right.
It'll happen.
Yeah.
So that's a big difference.
Yeah.
I think the expectation that women can work or not. I hear there still are the mommy wars, but I wonder how much of that is income based. Certain neighborhoods versus others where people have the luxury of not working.
I see.
But I think people in this country, it's much more normal. I mean, it confounds me that a woman hasn't been president yet, in this sense that it hasn't been a woman. To me, gender is sort of irrelevant.
Right.
And I don't want to get into politics, but it confounds me that people honestly think there's a reason women are. What was it? One of the talk show host said, "Congratulate America on being 89th in the world."
Right.
That 89 or 88 other countries have had women leaders. So that truly confounds me. We just haven't found the right one, perhaps, or whatever. But straying away from that, from the politics side of things, I think in this country we've come a long way. We've got a long way to go, but in many ways we know it.
Right.
What I find so complex and worrisome and inscrutable are societies where it's not even a possibility.
Yeah.
Where women are subhuman.
Yeah.
And I'm being judgmental on other societies, which I don't really have a right to be.
Right.
But I don't understand that either.
Yeah. I mean, there's certain truths to judgment, so I think that often there are certain truths to judgment, so I think that's fair. I think like a nugget of wisdom in everything you just said is the difference in awareness of, the fact that there's issues. It seems like that's the critical thing, which I'm just intellectually interested in because I feel like that kind of relates to mindfulness
yes,
and
absolutely.
mental health and something that, I'm interested in general. How do you feel that like, you earlier on in the podcast, you talked about like you were blissfully ignorant, about like your status as a woman and how that was, hindering you. How do you think on either an individual or a broader level, like awareness can make a difference, whether in your own career path or on a broader level?
think awareness is good.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's what you do with that awareness.
Mm.
If I'd been more aware, I might have more proactively planned
Mm-hmm.
for it. As I say, I didn't run into major obstacles until I got into more senior management.
Right.
Partly by choice, because there were other things going on in my life, or I was having kids, and so I didn't have disappointments with my career
Mm-hmm.
that to me were necessarily gender based.
Right.
At least if they were, I wasn't aware
Mm-hmm.
of it. Not that I didn't see things, but for me, it was fine. Then once I got to a point where things were sort of balanced and I wanted to proceed in my career, definitely gender.
Yeah.
I mean, I was more qualified, more capable, doing better, and some guy would get something. I was like, whoa, what just
Mm-hmm.
happened here?
Mm-hmm.
And I think part of it is planning for it, and part of it is how you react and deal with it. And
Yeah.
again, going back to the don't be the hysterical woman, unfortunately.
Yeah.
You know, I'm not saying don't do that, but
But
it's not a successful,
yeah.
typically a successful route. So you really have to be good at what you do. You have to be better.
Yeah.
You got to figure out the politics.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't just have corporate politics, you have gender politics.
Right.
And you got to figure that out and sort of figure out how you're going to get there and produce.
Yeah. One thing I've noticed is like, and maybe I can't think of a specific example, but it'll be like, you know, when you speak about a certain thing that upsets you, you know, some sort of gender discrimination that you notice, and it's like, well, that's the way it is, just accept it and move on. If you can, how do you identify when do you accept something and move on, and when do you stand up for what you believe in? And or are they not mutually exclusive?
I don't think the things that I've sort of accepted are the reality that men with whom I work don't deal well with what they view to be a hysterical woman.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's rational. But I have learned that I am more successful if I take out the emotion or I keep things humorous or whatnot. So those are one of those. I don't think it's right. I think it's a metric that we allow to be predominant. The men's point of view is the one we all have to accept. I don't know that I can change that. Yeah. I just know when I respond by sort of kowtowing to their metric, I'm more successful in that. Just I haven't made that my huge fight. It's just an observation I've
right
had. In terms of, I'm not very accepting of things that are
everyone. I knew this.
I'm really not. I mean, I recently brought together a bunch of people with a contact of mine, and then all the guys go off to play golf, knowing damn well I don't play golf, and I'm ticked.
Yeah.
So I've started golf lessons, and I've told them next time I'm playing golf, and they're not meeting any more of my contacts. I'm livid.
Yeah.
I've just had enough of that.
Yeah.
That's stupid. Who likes golf? I don't know, but I'm going to figure it out.
No one.
So, and I'm having a good time learning it, but it's one of those, really? And so I'm going to take people shooting and not invite the guys who invited. It's a guy's thing. I want to shoot. And the people who walked off and played golf aren't coming.
You have a lot of things to shoot at.
I do. So, the thing when it's some of it is just, men and women view the world differently, and the emotional side can come across differently. I'm learning to understand that. When things stand in my way because of gender, I don't think you should stand for it.
So this made me think of something that I actually really wanted to talk to you about. In therapy this week, I started talking about anger. Everyone, shout out to my therapist. We're going to do this every week.
Excellent.
And I realized, I have not really been in touch with my anger as a person.
Let me help you. Sorry. Let me show you.
And I've turned, for whatever reason, I don't feel comfortable expressing anger. And one particular reason is I've used the phrase, I don't want to be burdened by the hysterical woman. I would rather not deal with the idea that I'll be misbehaving or misperforming as my role as a girl or woman because of this really important, productive emotion,
Right.
A lot of, and I think anger can often be equated with the masculine, in terms of like, aggression, throwing things, the stereotypical like misbehaving things. But it often, and on the other side of the gender spectrum, is, seen as this like hysteria. So how, when we talk about emotions as women, a lot of the time it is that hysterical like nature, but how do you use anger productively, and when do you know that it's, regardless of gender, it's an inappropriate amount, and how do you harness it?
It has been my experience that as a woman, if I get angry at work, it is deemed to be inappropriate. It is regardless
of whether or not it's okay.
I can say something in the same tone or same way or same words as a man, and I will have crossed a line.
Right.
And it confounds me because the people who most will call me out are insane men. It's like, wait, you get to, practically throw a chair across the table, and I just got angry and inappropriate.
What is the feedback when you say like people say,
oh, you were out of line, you really can't be that way, and you can't talk to people that way. It's like,
and these are peers.
Peers peers. Like, are you kidding me? And so I clearly don't know. Again, it goes back to women are held to a different standard. It's not right.
Right.
And I'm not endorsing it. I just know I haven't found what it is.
Yeah.
So I try to keep my negative emotions more in check. Maybe go in my office but because it has not served me well.
Right.
So I don't know. I haven't figured that out. I remember one time that was, you'll get caught on the smallest things where you're not even really angry. It's like an irritation.
Right.
The printer isn't working for the 75th time, and it's like, God damn it! It's like you're really out of line. It's like, really?
You fix the fucking printer.
Exactly. Whatever. But so I would have to say that I'm still trying to figure that out.
Yeah. Well, I think that's really powerful and really important to admit, because I've just discovered literally 2 or 3 days ago the effect that turning my anger inward has had on my self-esteem. Because when I feel angry about something and I don't have the capacity to explain it, which means it's an external emotion. So if I can't place that external emotion on an external entity, there's nowhere else to go except for in.
Right.
So then self-blame, self-guilt, shame, all these different things. And in so many different areas of my life, professional, personal, anything. And I think I look forward to, and I'm thankful for that awareness, because I now know that like, it's going to be, I think, hard for me and scary to practice expressing anger. But I realized that it's like, if I don't do this, I will continue to feel intensely guilty about things that are out of my control or that didn't hurt someone. I had no intention of hurting someone, all these different things. Or, like I can think of an example of something at work when something went wrong and it didn't even cross my mind to not blame myself. It didn't even cross my mind. I was like, I should have been responsible for this. This is completely my fault.
Right.
Because I felt that I had to address it somehow. And my only emotional capacity at that time was just, this is what I know.
Right.
This is what I know. This is all I can do. So I think that that's something that we have to talk more about as women or anyone in a marginalized position,
Sure.
That can involve race, whether transgender, nonconforming. I have no idea what that's like. That's a completely different conversation. Class, all these different things. But, so much of, I think, the disdain towards feminism or women, in those types of more powerful roles is a fear or a disgust of the expression of anger.
Anger or outrage. They're not necessarily mutually exclusive.
That's a good point. I'm not sure. I think both hold power. And I think that when people are not in a position of power and they express an emotion that can contain power, that's when they get pushback.
Right.
So I think
I find working out helps a lot.
Working out helps a lot. Working out helps a lot.
Not to dilute the object of your anger or outrage, but to control the sort of reactive emotion and make it more both manageable and productive.
Yep. And it brings you back into your body.
Mm-hmm.
And, that's one thing we talk about a lot, my boyfriend and I, Terrence, is, he got a great piece of advice from, who was it? He don't remember. But it was, when you are stuck in your head, get back into your body.
Willink.
Who?
Jocko Willink.
Jocko Willink. Who's that?
He's a former Navy SEAL commander.
Former Navy SEAL commander. So, coming from a great...
Right. What does he know?
Yeah, right. When you're in your head, get into your body.
Right.
I think that's something that,
Which just makes things more understandable.
Yeah.
You again, ironically, as emotional beings, it tempers the emotion so you can be a little more rational about it. Not that rationality is the be all and end all, obviously.
Right. Absolutely.
So,
well, I think we're just running out of time. But is there anything that either to young women or maybe women of your slightly older age than
no,
I you want to say?
I love being a woman. It's a challenge, but being a man is a challenge. I love it, and I'm excited for young women, and I think just go for it. As I said at the beginning, perfect isn't the ideal,
Mm-hmm.
and it's okay to forgive yourself, pace yourself, but go for it. Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. I just want
Thank
to
you.
say I'm so excited and this I'm so happy that I had you as my first guest
I'm
because
so honored. Thank you.
It just provides the perfect context for where I'm at,
Thank you.
and the ability to explain what I've experienced and learn from you. And
thank you.
But it's true.
I appreciate that. Thank you. And I'm very flattered, honored, and excited for you.
Queen Grace.
Thank you.
In the flesh, everyone. All right. Well, thank you everyone so much. This is the Liv Life podcast. And I look forward to hearing from you all in the future.